My relationship with History Alive is that the group that I'm with, Army Group South, is a member group of the organisation that runs History Alive, which is the Queensland Living History Federation.
I'm with the Army Group South, and we have people that are doing impressions from World War I right through to World War II, Allied and Axis, predominantly German, and this is my very first event, so I'm a complete novice.
History Alive's been going on since about 2000. I myself, I've been here every year in various guises, be it 19th century Queensland or with Army Group South, or generally pottering around with many of the other groups and eras that people will find.
I've had a keen interest in World War II history for many, many years, and recently found out that my granddad served in New Guinea, and his battalion was disbanded in 1946. So it's my goal to set up a 2nd 7th Australian Infantry Battalion unit somewhere in the future.
Okay, well, we're the Emu Gully Field Volunteers. This is actually the first year we've attended History Alive. Myself, I've been involved with reenacting for 12 years, attended multiple History Alives. We've formed a new group up towards Toowoomba, just at Helidon. So we've got new recruits, first time at HA. It's a brilliant weekend, well worth attending. 15th Battalion was a combination Queensland-Tasmanian unit formed in 1914. They landed on the afternoon of the 25th of April at Gallipoli, so we were part of the first Anzac. Served right through the Gallipoli campaign. After Gallipoli, they were with the rest of the Australian troops, were taken back to Egypt, reformed, and then went on to the Western Front. We became we were part of the 4th Brigade, which became part of the 4th Division. 4th Division fought all through France and Belgium during the war, were involved in a number of major offensives. We were involved at the Battle of Hamel, which was the greatest victory for the Australians at that point in 1918. Also being part of the 4th Brigade, the 4th Brigade had the highest casualty rates of any of the Australian brigades in the First World War.
I represent the 9th Battalion, which was the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Australian Infantry Division. The 9th Brigade was a Queensland battalion formed around this area, White Bay and Burnett, and actually led the attack on Gallipoli. We landed at Gallipoli. We were the first troops to land on Gallipoli. The 9th Battalion also played a leading role in the Battle of Pozieres the following year. In one of the early attacks in France.
These events are, awesome. You come and meet a wide variety of people. You get to see different eras, and also, especially representing the AIF, the Australian Imperial Force, the Anzacs. It's sort of a bit of self-pride, and also being a Defence Force cadet. Sort of, get to run around the old stuff. Just sort of, makes you feel good.
I enjoy it from the educational point of view, helping to educate the public about our history. People know about Gallipoli in the First World War, but we're coming up now to the centenary. Gallipoli was only a small part of what the Australians did in World War I. They actually made their fame in the Western Front, and that's what we're attempting to reenact, is actually the unit based around 1917, 1918, when the AIF was the premier fighting unit in Europe.
from Company of the Phoenix. The Company of the Phoenix reenacts 15th century European history, and what we do is both military reenactment as well as the lords and the ladies involved in civilian reenactment as well. History Alive is one of the primary events we have for Queensland Living History Federation, which is the governing body that is over the top of all of us, and they invite everyone along to this day and this weekend so that we can present all of the history that we reenact. So there's everyone from Roman all the way through to, I think, the Vietnam War. And so we fit somewhere in the middle of all that 2,000 years of history.
Well, we have all sorts of people that dress up in different costumes to represent different sections of our period. Our period is 1435 to 1485. So it's smack bang in the middle of the 15th century and before the major changes in the 15th century. So it's a really good period. It's the pinnacle of armour, German Gothic and Milanese armour, and that's the pinnacle before they turn into rapiers and muskets.
We're really trying to represent the end of knighthood. So knighthood became something entirely different once guns were used on the field, and the gun took over from where we finish up. So after that period, you can train a peasant to use a gun in 2 weeks. It takes at least 15 years to train a knight. And so it would take a long time to train a knight. Peasant comes out and shoots him, and that's when the knights stopped being viable on the fields. They were too costly compared to a peasant with a gun. And so what we are trying to represent is the end of the War of the Roses, where there was massive battles for the ownership of England, the ownership of France, and those areas were always battling each other in that period. And so we represent that real rough and tumble fighting era. But there was also a lot of decorative side to it. There was a lot of pageantry in the tournaments, the jousting was crazy, and the items of clothing became more and more elegant as more and more wealth was found post-Black Plague. More and more peasantry were able to afford to buy things because they could be paid for their work. And so we help represent that by showing off the merchant classes as well as the nobility.
Yes, I attend History Alive as a member of the Queensland Colonial Association and also as a member of the New South Wales-based 73rd Regiment of Foot, which is a reenactment group which reflects Lachlan Macquarie's presence with the Highland Regiment after the fall of Bligh in 1809. In the 1700s and into the 1800s itself, it was called the Age of Agony because surgery or medicine in general was very poorly understood.
It's a simple remedy, and it's good old-fashioned gin. And it gives great comfort to the patient.
It's a frightening time in the history of medicine. The practices were very barbaric, but they were appropriate to the general attitude of the European community. If you take the city of London, 1 in every 6 shops in the 1700s was a grog shop, and gin and other potent liquors were the downfall of the whole population, and the streets were full of drunken families, and also crime was very high. Roving robbers and footpads would take advantage of anyone who ventured forth. It was traumatic. Horrific when you think that It was all mostly warfare. The Napoleonic Wars had gone on for so long. The advent of gunpowder created an entirely new story about injuries on the field. They'd been cutting injuries before that, which quite often were not necessarily treated very poorly. But with the advent of gunpowder and the firing of a lead ball of about 19 millimetres diameter, the impact at low velocity on the human body was truly amazing, horrific. It shattered whatever bone structures it came in contact with, and the surgeons had no way of treating it except to remove limbs if they were fractures. If they were penetrations of the body, your luck was you died, or you remain for the rest of your life with the musket ball in place. Surgeons' choices were not very not very numerous. They did what they could and crossed their fingers.
Okay, I'm a 12th, 13th century reenactor for the Company of Knights Bachelor. I represent a Scottish knight in the Holy Land on crusade. The Lady Marguerite here represents a lady of the same period. We are members of History Alive because it is one of the overarching groups that provide us insurance and coverage and provides events such as this for us to participate in. In my case, I represent the knight, as I said. We fight on foot, we do archery tournaments, and we entertain the public, and as well as educating them in the 12th and 13th century crusades in Nutrima, or the Holy Lands.
Myself, was on crusade on a pilgrimage with my husband, who actually passed away whilst we were travelling home. So I am currently in the city of Arca recovering, and then I will go home to my homeland of Aquitaine shortly. So I have been very fortunate with meeting some of the members within the Company of Knights Bachelor who have taken me in and offered me shelter and assistance in my time of need.
It totally involved in presenting not just the fighting, but the lifestyle of the period. We research our personas, we know the kings of our time. We basically are portraying a person of our period as accurately as possible. If you were a lord, you wore armour. I mean, the armour, if you were a man-at-arms, might be a padded gambeson, but that gambeson would be reasonably proof against a sword blow, not necessarily a thrust, but a cut. That's the basic level of armour. Then you go up to chainmail, then you might wear other layers of armour on top. I generally wear 2 layers of armour over a gambeson. Basically, you're the medieval equivalent of a tank.
And we do the things that the ladies would have done in that time period. So the lovely outfits that you see are all hand-stitched, and they are all handmade, and we do things like that. So we look at everything within the time period that the ladies would have attended to within their home.
Right, I'm a member of the American Civil War Roundtable of Queensland. We represent people that fought in the American Civil War, 1861 to 65. I'm a Confederate private in the era of the 1860s, when we had a reasonable sort of uniform. By the end of the war, they virtually had nothing. Virtually no shoes, wore bare feet, and ragged clothes, because basically the uniforms never got replaced.
Charge! Bayonets! Thrust! Guard!
There were, at the end of the war, just to fill in a bit of history for you, there were 624,000 Americans killed in the Civil War. That's adding both sides together. So it is good history. I love it. I love history in general, but I particularly love the American Civil War history of it. We've been coming for a number of years, probably 12 years. I'm not quite sure how long it's been going, but about late at that time, and we've always had an encampment. We always do drills up there of what the tactics that they used to use in the Civil War and things like that, yeah. I don't carry arms. All I do is carry the flag, and I stay basically in the centre of any lineup. And unfortunately, I'm the first person to die in most cases.
Morning, my name's Peter Gow. I'm from Standard Bearers and I'm dressed as a senior NCO of the Imperial German Army of World War II, World War I, and it's the 5th Bavarian Regiment, and it's one of the elite regiments of the German Army of that period. Standard Bearers has been involved in History Alive since literally the beginning, and we represent Australian and British and German soldiers from World War I all the way through to World War II. We do British airborne, British soldiers, American, all aspects of it. We represent the soldier, not the politics. We're going to do very soon a World War I battle, and later on we're going to do a small vinaigrette on the road which will be incorporated in World War II, where an encounter between German troops and American troops with just a couple of vehicles involved in it. It was one of the elite shock troop regiments of the German Army. Unfortunately they lost a lot of people during the war. But what we like is the uniform of that period, a very nice looking uniform, and we represent the soldier. And we just talk to people what it'd be like to be living as a soldier of that period, and what the rations they ate, the things they got involved in, the music, in the games and things like that. They were disbanded after the war, but their history has been kept going through certain World War II regiments and into the modern days. Some of the regiments have kept the history alive of that period.
Standard Bearers, quick!